The Toy Box Killer, inside the nightmare chamber. In the vast deserts of New Mexico, where the heat blurs the horizon and small towns fade into silence, a nightmare was unfolding behind closed doors. For years, women vanished without explanation, some reappearing with memories fractured like broken glass, others never seen again. At the center of these horrors stood a man whose crimes defy imagination. David Parker Ray, the sadistic predator known as the Toy Box Killer. Ray was not the kind of killer who struck in moments of rage or impulsive cruelty. His horrors were engineered, planned, and performed inside a custom-built torture chamber he chillingly called his toy box. This soundproof trailer, filled with medical tools, restraints, cages, diagrams, and even a gynecological chair, was a dungeon that turned fear into a science. For decades, Ray operated undetected, protected by the isolation of the desert, the fear of his victims, and the complicity of those who helped him. What investigators would uncover in 1999 remains one of the most disturbing cases in American criminal history. This is the story of manipulation, cruelty, survival, and justice. This is the story of the Toy Box Killer, the man behind the monster. Long before the world knew his name, David Parker Ray lived a life that gave no obvious warning of the horrors he would one day create. Born in 1939 in Belen, New Mexico, Ray grew up in a household marked by instability, strict discipline, and emotional distance. His father, often absent, introduced him to alcohol at a young age and gave him violent magazines filled with bondage and torture illustrations. These images planted seeds that would grow into dark fantasies. Fantasies he kept hidden from everyone. As he entered adulthood, Ray worked as a mechanic and was known by neighbors as a quiet, polite man. No criminal record, no violent history, nothing to suggest the darkness inside him. But privately, Ray filled notebooks with drawings and plans, sketches of restraints, diagrams of torture devices, and elaborate fantasies involving complete physical and psychological control over women. What made Ray different from most killers was patience. He didn't lash out in chaotic rage. He waited, planned, and crafted a world where he alone held power. His fantasy life became the core of his existence, and he cultivated it quietly for decades. By the time he reached his 50s, Ray had perfected the persona of an ordinary man. He worked for the state, maintained relationships, and blended into the fabric of the small town of Elephant Butte. But beneath this facade, he was building something unspeakable that he believed would allow him to live out every twisted desire he'd nurtured since childhood. David Parker Ray wasn't just becoming a killer. He was becoming an architect of fear, ready to unleash the darkness he had been rehearsing for a lifetime. Building the Toy Box, a factory of nightmares. Hidden deep in the quiet desert town of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, David Parker Ray was constructing what would become one of the most horrifying torture chambers ever uncovered in American criminal history. To the outside world, it was just a large, nondescript, white cargo trailer parked near his home on Desert Shadow Lane. But inside, Ray was crafting something far more sinister, a fully engineered toy box, a place designed not for storage, but for suffering. The process began slowly. Ray collected pieces over years, each item chosen with meticulous purpose. He ordered surgical tools, medical equipment, and custom restraints. He studied anatomy and the psychology of pain. He researched how to manipulate the human mind through fear, deprivation, and sensory control. Neighbors assumed he was simply a hobbyist or mechanic stocking up supplies. No one suspected he was assembling the parts of a torture chamber. Inside the trailer, Ray installed a soundproofing system so expertly crafted that screams could not escape. He mounted hooks, pulleys, chains, and whips on the walls. A hospital-quality gynecological chair occupied the center, a cold metal throne where victims would be strapped down for hours or days. Monitors, cameras, and electrical devices lined the room like instruments in some medical laboratory of cruelty. But the most chilling detail wasn't the equipment. It was the audio tape. Ray recorded a long, scripted message, a monotonous, emotionless speech he forced victims to listen to upon waking up in the toy box. In it, he explained in graphic detail what he intended to do to them, what rules they were required to follow to survive, and how no one could hear them scream. This tape was not just meant to threaten. It was meant to break their spirit before he even touched them. What makes Ray even more disturbing is how he maintained such secrecy. He was careful, strategic. He never used his real credit cards for purchases that might raise suspicion. He kept his trailer locked, hidden, and guarded. Even those closest to him, friends, coworkers, girlfriends, knew almost nothing of his private life. The desert became his shield, a barrier that isolated victims from any hope of escape. Over time, Ray's toy box transformed into a highly organized command center of brutality, complete with diagrams showing how to restrain victims from maximum control, racks of syringes and chemicals, and notebooks detailing his methods. Investigators would later compare the toy box to something out of a horror film, except every piece of it was real, and every detail had been used on living victims. By the late 1990s, Ray's trailer was fully operational, and he felt untouchable. After decades of planning, the fantasies he had nurtured since childhood were finally ready to be acted out without hesitation. The toy box was complete, and Ray believed no one would ever uncover what he had built in the desert. But the nightmare was only beginning. The victims, lost, broken, and silenced. For years, women vanished around Elephant Butte and Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, quiet disappearances that barely made local headlines. They were often vulnerable, women struggling with addiction, poverty, unstable housing, or abusive relationships. These were the people society ignored, and David Parker Ray knew it. He chose victims who he believed no one would fight for. Ray's method was cold and calculated. He would approach women under the guise of friendliness or offer them rides. Sometimes he used his girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, to lure victims, knowing a woman's presence lowered their guard. Other times, he impersonated a police officer, flashing a fake badge he kept in his truck. Once the victim was in his vehicle, escape became nearly impossible. Within seconds, he could restrain them, drug them, or transport them straight to the toy box. The moment his victims woke up inside the trailer, they were met with confusion, terror, and a sensation of being trapped in a metallic coffin. The first thing they heard wasn't Ray's voice, it was the tape. A chilling, recorded message played through speakers, informing them that they had been abducted, that resistance was pointless, and that they would endure unimaginable pain. Ray delivered his rules and threats with clinical calmness, stripping away any feeling of hope. Victims later described their time in the toy box as a blurred nightmare. Days or weeks of torture, psychological manipulation, and forced compliance. The desert became a prison, the trailer a laboratory of suffering. Many victims were injected with drugs that distorted their memories, making it difficult for them to recall details clearly. Ray understood the human mind well enough to know that fragmented memories could be dismissed by authorities. But perhaps the most harrowing part of Ray's crimes was what happened after he finished with his victims. Some women were released, abandoned in remote desert areas, left with shattered memories and broken bodies. Others were threatened with death if they ever spoke out. And some victims, investigators believe, were killed, though the full number will never be known. Ray once claimed in his journals that he had taken as many as 40 lives, but no bodies have ever been found. The few survivors who later came forward described Ray with a haunting consistency. A man who treated torture like a hobby. A man who enjoyed watching fear more than inflicting pain. A man whose calmness made him more terrifying than rage ever could. Most tragically, many victims were disbelieved for years. Their memories were too fragmented, their backgrounds too complicated, their trauma too deep. Ray counted on this. He didn't just break their bodies, he shattered their voices. With each victim he took, Ray grew more confident, more cruel, and more convinced he would never be caught. But in 1999, one woman would escape, and everything would unravel. The escape, the woman who brought the monster down. On March 19, 1999, everything changed. After years of carefully concealed horror, one woman, a survivor whose courage would shake the entire case open, escaped the toy box and exposed David Parker Ray's secret world. Her name was Cynthia Vigil, a 22-year-old woman who had been abducted off the street after Ray and his girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, lured her into their vehicle. Once inside, she was overpowered, restrained, and transported to the toy box. There, she endured 3 days of torture, drugging, and psychological abuse. Ray followed his usual ritual, stripping her of control, forcing her to listen to the recorded tape, and binding her to the infamous gynecological chair. But Cynthia was different. She fought, observed, memorized details, and waited, patiently, for a moment, any moment, to escape. That moment came when Cindy Hendy made a fatal mistake. While Ray was at work, Cindy attempted to feed Cynthia. As she approached, Cynthia spotted a key ring left on a nearby table. With a surge of desperate courage, she lunged at Cindy, knocking her over and grabbing the keys. Cindy struggled, smashing a lamp over Cynthia's head, but Cynthia refused to let go. Blood poured down her face, but she continued fighting, unlocking one hand, then the other. Barefoot, nude, bruised, and covered in cuts, Cynthia dashed out of the trailer and into the harsh desert sun. She ran, her hands still bound by chains, her body broken. She fled across the road, screaming for help. She pounded on doors. Many people were too frightened or too confused to respond. Finally, a couple opened their home and called police. When officers saw Cynthia, shaking, bleeding, and dragging a 5-foot chain, they realized she had come from something far more horrific than a simple assault. Police rushed to the property on Desert Shadow Lane. When they entered the toy box, officers were greeted with a sight so disturbing that some investigators had to step back outside to regain composure. The trailer was filled with restraints, hooks, surgical tools, diagrams, and evidence of years of torture. The infamous audio tape lay ready to be played. It was a scene of engineered evil. Cynthia's escape shattered Ray's illusion of invincibility. As Ray and Hendy were arrested, both attempted to downplay or explain away what the police found. But they could no longer hide behind fear or secrecy. Cynthia's bravery had exposed everything. Yet as investigators began digging deeper, they soon discovered that the toy box was only a small part of a much larger nightmare, and a question that would haunt the case forever. How many victims were there really? The investigation, secrets, accomplices, and a trail of horror. Once Cynthia Vigil's escape blew the case open, investigators realized they were dealing with one of the darkest criminal operations in U.S. history. What they uncovered in the following months shocked even seasoned detectives. The toy box, a crime scene from hell. As forensic experts combed through the trailer, they documented over 1,000 pieces of evidence: restraints, chains, syringes, medical devices, and notebooks filled with Ray's twisted fantasies. There were also photographs and videotapes, some showing women in various stages of torture or unconsciousness. Many of these women were never identified. The gynecological chair, the soundproof panels, and the audio recording were only the beginning. Investigators found whips, pulleys, clamps, and surgical saws, a coffin-like box with ventilation holes, detailed diagrams of how to restrain victims, a mirror positioned above the chair so victims watched their own suffering, a video camera stand for recording torture sessions. It was a place purpose-built for cruelty, a web of accomplices. To the horror of investigators, Ray did not work alone. His girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, admitted her role in luring victims and helping restrain them. She showed little remorse, even mocking victims during interrogation. But the most disturbing revelation was Ray's daughter, Glinda Jessie Ray, who was suspected of participating in kidnappings and assaults. Ray also had connections to local criminals who were believed to have supplied drugs and even victims. The case was no longer about one man. It was a network of depravity, victims who were silenced. As the investigation expanded, more women came forward, some from across New Mexico and Arizona, claiming to have been abducted, drugged, and tortured by Ray over the years. Many have been dismissed in the past because their memories were fragmented or because law enforcement didn't take them seriously. Now, those stories were suddenly horrifyingly real. Some victims recalled being chained for days. Others remembered waking in strange rooms, lights glaring into their eyes, and Ray standing over them with clinical calmness. A few remembered nothing except flashes, metal, straps, cold instruments, a voice giving commands. Investigators also found diaries written by Ray, in which he described torturing and killing women. In one entry, he claimed he may have taken up to 40 lives, though no bodies were ever discovered. A community in shock. Truth or Consequences was a quiet desert town. People knew their neighbors. They trusted one another. The revelation that a man could operate a torture chamber in their midst for years without detection shook the community to its core. How? Was the question on everyone's mind. How could this happen without anyone noticing? How could so many women disappear without an outcry? How could evil hide in plain sight for so long? Even investigators struggled to understand how Ray kept his crimes hidden for decades. His victims were carefully chosen, people unlikely to be believed, people living on the margins, people afraid to come forward. Ray weaponized their circumstances against them. A case too big for courts. The sheer scale of the evidence meant the case quickly became overwhelming for New Mexico courts. Prosecutors had to organize charges meticulously, reviewing thousands of documents, tapes, and statements. With victims scattered, memories damaged, and Ray refusing to cooperate, every step of the legal process became a battle. But despite the challenges, one truth became clear. David Parker Ray would not escape justice. Justice, death, and the questions that still haunt the desert. The arrest of David Parker Ray marked the beginning of a long and complex legal battle. Prosecutors faced a unique challenge. Despite the horrific evidence found in the toy box, there were no confirmed bodies. Many victims could not remember enough to testify clearly due to the drugs Ray used on them, and others were too traumatized to face him in court. Without solid physical proof of murder, prosecutors had to pursue charges related to kidnapping, sexual assault, and torture. The trials began. Ray was charged in multiple cases, the strongest of which involved Cynthia Vigil, the woman whose escape had shattered his empire of secrecy. Her testimony was powerful, raw, and unwavering. She told the story of her abduction, her days of torture, and her desperate escape with a clarity that gave the jury no doubt. Other survivors whose memories had slowly resurfaced began to come forward as well. Their statements, combined with the overwhelming physical evidence found in the trailer, painted a chilling and consistent picture of Ray's methods. Cindy Hendy turns on Ray. Ray's girlfriend and accomplice, Cindy Hendy, quickly realized the weight of the charges against her. In a strategic move to reduce her sentence, she agreed to testify against Ray. She revealed details investigators had only suspected: how Ray drugged victims, how he restrained them, how he disposed of evidence, and how he called his victims projects. Her cooperation solidified the case. The conviction. In 2001, after months of legal proceedings, Ray accepted a plea deal. 224 years in prison. No possibility of parole. It was a symbolic sentence, effectively ensuring he would die behind bars. But Ray didn't serve long. On May 28, 2002, only 3 years into his sentence, David Parker Ray suffered a fatal heart attack while being transported within the correctional system. He died at age 62, taking with him secrets that investigators had hoped to extract. The lingering mysteries. Even after Ray's death, haunting questions linger. How many victims were there truly? Ray claimed as many as 40, but the desert kept its secrets. No bodies were ever recovered. Where were the missing women taken? Investigators searched his property, Elephant Butte Lake, and surrounding wastelands for years, with no success. Did Ray have more accomplices? Some evidence suggests other unidentified individuals may have participated or witnessed his crimes. How did he evade detection for so long? The answer lies partly in his chosen victims, people society ignored, people least likely to be believed. a community forever changed. Truth or consequences, once a quiet desert town, will forever carry the scar of Ray's crimes. The toy box was dismantled, but its memory remains, a reminder of how evil can hide behind ordinary faces. The case spurred major changes in how law enforcement handles missing persons, especially those from vulnerable communities. Survivors who refuse to be silent. Despite all the pain, the story does not end in darkness. Cynthia Vigil, along with other survivors, rebuilt their lives with unimaginable strength. They refused to let Ray erase their voices. Cynthia became an advocate for victims of kidnapping and assault, turning her trauma into power. Their courage ensures that the world remembers their stories and a monster they defeated. David Parker Ray died without revealing the true extent of his crimes, but the women who survived him ensured that his evil was exposed. The truth, once buried in a metal trailer in the desert, can never be hidden again. The desert still whispers. The story of David Parker Ray, the man the world now knows as the Toy Box Killer, is more than a tale of cruelty. It is a chilling lesson about silence, vulnerability, and the dangers that hide behind ordinary smiles. For years, Ray walked freely among the people of truth or consequences. He fixed cars, chatted with neighbors, visited local shops, while a torture chamber sat only yards away, sealed by metal and protected by fear. Yet even in the darkest stories, there are lights that refuse to die. The women who survived him, broken, scarred, but unyielding, became the truth-tellers who shattered his empire of secrecy. Their courage forced the world to confront the horrors inside the toy box, and their voices brought justice where bodies could not be found. Though Ray died without confessing the full scope of his crimes, the legacy of his victims lives on. Their bravery changed how law enforcement handles missing person cases, how communities protect their vulnerable, and how survivors of trauma are treated and believed. The desert may keep many secrets buried beneath its sands, but the story of the Toy Box Killer stands as a reminder. Evil can be engineered, but truth can always escape. And so, the wind still blows across Elephant Butte, carrying echoes of a nightmare that once thrived in silence, now exposed, remembered, and never forgotten.